Byte took a deep breath as he gazed out over the fog-shrouded basin. After separating from Tracker and Chime, it had taken him 3 more days of travel to reach his destination, Storm, but he still had a bit of a journey ahead, as he still had to meet up with the Pokemon he had sent a letter informing them he would be visiting with an offer for them. He had been fretting over whether they would fully accept Storm and their circumstances, or if they would deny the egg, leaving Byte to have to think of another solution. As he sat there contemplating, a form materialized in front of him, silently causing him to jolt out of his daze and nearly topple over. Looking up, he met the amused look of a Shuppet staring back at him. "It has not been that long since we last saw you and yours, Byte. Now you have come back alone proposing an offer. It definitely intrigues us." As the Shuppet floated back and forth in front of Byte, it inspected the bag carried that seemed to bulge more from the contents than it normally would have. "Maybe it will intrigue your matron enough to accept. Do you mind guiding me to her bauble?" Byte dipped his head respectfully to the Shuppet as he made his request, earning him a giggle from the ghost type. "With pleasure. She was actually the one who had sent me here to retrieve you on arrival." Bauble twirled in the air before starting off at a swift float in the direction of the depths of the basin, with Byte following. Occasionally, Byte would peek inside the bag to check on Storm in the process, to make sure nothing was wrong with the egg. As the two continued further in, the fog became denser to the point it blotted out the sun and made it seem overcast. This location was constantly covered in dense fog even during the brightest part of the day, so it was a strongly favored location for ghost types to call home. After a little more walking, they reached the depths of the basin, where the show of Shuppets resided. Many forms started to appear as Byte walked forward, all with curiosity in their gaze. Finally, a Banette appeared in front of them, giving him a welcoming smile. "Thank you for retrieving our guest, Bauble." Nodding towards the Shuppet who had guided Byte, the Banette signaled him to join the others. "Now then, what is this offer you came to propose to us, dear Byte?" Slowly lowering his head, Byte slid off the strap around his neck that held the bag at his side. After the bag was gently placed on the ground, he opened it, revealing the egg inside to the group. "I have come to offer you and your show an egg to raise, Trapeze. This egg is that of an Eevee, one of 3 that we came across because of our hunt for the outlaws Blight and Chrome." Trapeze stepped closer and inspected the egg, circling around Byte in the process and taking in his words and gestures. Surely he did not just stumble upon it unprotected in the open. No sane parent would leave 3 eggs unattended as such. That must mean it was born to them during their fugitive life. Byte nodded his head, keeping his gaze and voice steady. "Your statement would be correct. The 2 had taken shelter in a cave some days ago to safely deliver the eggs, and it was the next day that we had captured them. It was my idea to rehome the 3 eggs, which Tracker and Chime agreed with. While it is not a ghost-type child, I do remember you stating you long to raise a child again, but are unwilling to have any more after what happened to your son." Trapeze whirled around and met Byte's gaze, letting a hint of malice slip into her gaze. "What are you getting at, city dweller?" She spat the words at him, uncomfortable about her sore spot being poked. "My offer is that you raise Storm here until they are able to take care of themselves, and potentially venture outside of the basin to search for their siblings, if that is what they wish. You get to raise the child again, but do not have to go through the pain of bearing it just to potentially lose it again." Trapeze glared at Byte as he stated his offer, her anger tangible in the air and causing the Shuppet to fidget nervously. "Fine. I will take your offer. You said its name is Storm? Then what of its siblings and where were they taken?" Trapeze gently retrieved the egg from the bag as she fished for the information Byte withheld purposefully until she prompted. Tracker took the egg he named Esper to the mossy forest, and Chime took the egg she named Starlight to the Fairy Light's plains. Trapeze nodded her head as she cradled the egg to herself, a gentleness she had thought long lost sparking in her chest. "Understood. Once Storm is old enough and shows a want to travel, I will inform him of his siblings and where they shall hail from. What he does beyond that is up to him." Byte went to respond but paused for a moment, as her words registered and he narrowed his eyes. "The egg has yet to hatch. It will do you well not to get your hopes up on Storm being a male Eevee." Trapeze just chuckled in response and cast an amused gaze at Byte as she gently stroked the egg. "But my dear Byte, it is a male Eevee within this egg, and he shall be of a brilliant mind once he grows. I should know. After all, I am the matron of the show. Eyes glinting with a surreal glow, Trapeze nodded toward the surrounding shuppets before gesturing towards Byte. Your offer has been accepted, and your welcome for today has worn out. Bauble, please show Byte the way out of the basin, and send him on his way. As the words finished, she turned and made her way back into the shadows, carrying Storm with her. After she disappeared from sight, Bauble made his way back to Byte's side, and prodded the Luxray. Alright, let's get you set on your path home before the matron is none too happy with either of us. Casting one more glance at where Trapeze had faded out, Byte rose to his paws and turned to follow Bauble, flicking his tail in farewell to the shuppets. Reaching the edge of the basin, where the fog ended, Byte climbed up the slope after bidding farewell to Bauble, and decided to rest at the nearby town he had sent the letter from. It was only an hour's trek, and he arrived at the inn just as the moon was rising into the sky. Sitting by the window in his room, he recalled a legend Tracker's grandmother seemed to be obsessed with and told to anyone and everyone who crossed her path. It had been ingrained into Team Respite's minds at this point. If you, the moon, truly bind us with all those we have crossed paths with in one way or another, then please, do not let the binding between these three siblings fail. It may take a few years, but I hope for them to share the same path someday. After sending his wish to the star-filled sky, Byte curled up on the nearby bedding and closed his eyes to sleep.
Chime heaved a sigh as she glanced at the egg in the bag at her side. She had agreed to take Starlight to the Fairylight Plains, but ever since she split with Tracker and Byte, she was feeling overwhelming guilt at how she'd wanted to get rid of the eggs at first. Time left on her own with her thoughts wasn't the best idea, she had found out during the last few days. Letting out another sigh, Chime continued on her way, shaking the depressing thoughts from her head as she neared the entrance to the plains. She had sent out a letter from a town she had left earlier today to inform the residents she had come to visit of her arrival. Approaching the border of the plains, she could see the severe shift in environment. There were a few trees scattered about with glowing mushrooms at their roots. The leaves on the trees varied in ranges of pastels of pink, purple, and blue, while the mushrooms were all a somewhat golden color. The grass took on a darker tint compared to the grass running up to it, and if you looked closely it seemed as if little light orbs floated up occasionally. Chime heaved a sigh as she glanced at the egg in the bag at her side. She had agreed to take Starlight to the Fairylight Plains, but ever since she split with Tracker and Byte, she was feeling overwhelming guilt at how she had wanted to get rid of the eggs at first. Time left on her own with her thoughts wasn't the best idea, she had found out during the last few days. Letting out another sigh, Chime continued on her way, shaking the depressing thoughts from her head as she neared the entrance to the plains. She had sent out a letter from a town she had left earlier today to inform the residents she had come to visit of her arrival. Approaching the border of the plains, she could see the severe shift in environment. There were a few trees scattered about with glowing mushrooms at their roots. The leaves on the trees varied in a range of pastels of pink, purple, and blue, while the mushrooms were all a somewhat golden color. The grass took on a darker tint compared to the grass running up to it, and if you looked closely it seemed as if little light orbs floated up occasionally. Many Pokemon liked to visit this location at night, and it was a famous date spot in the area for couples. Mainly fairy types resided here, but there was a small diversity to the inhabitants. One example is that Volbeat and Alumaze live here as well, and there was a waterfall leading down into a lake at the far side of the plains, where they love to dance around on most nights. If you were to climb the rock face to the top of the waterfall and follow the river a ways, then you would reach the scorched outlands. Team Respite had trekked through both areas tirelessly in their search for Blight and Chrome, not long after it had started. During their journey through these plains, they had come across a large group of an evolution line of a small, hot pink Pokemon carrying around various forms of steel hammers. It was these very Pokemon that Chime had ventured here to meet. Well, at the very least she had come to meet the leader of their tank, their general, Luciv, and his partner. The two were incapable of having children naturally, but they had been looking to adopt for some time, so it was a very likely chance they may accept the egg. Stepping over the boundary, she begins to head further into the plains with thoughts still nagging at the back of her mind. Her heart carried more weight with each step. As she reached a crossroads not far in, she spotted a Tinkaton with a silver hammer waiting by the path to the right. Shaking her head, she threw the ever-growing murky thoughts to the back of her mind and raised her tail in greeting to the pink Pokemon as she called out to them. Well, if it isn't Luciv, couldn't be bothered to wait at home? Luciv looked over at the approaching leopard and adjusted his grip on the hammer as he stepped forward. I couldn't sit still, and came here to wait for your arrival. Cross is out on morning patrol, so he does not know that you are coming with a gift. I wanted to surprise him." Chime nodded her head in understanding. Even long before the two held their pledge ceremony, they had been longing for a child, but both were unwilling to find a foster, so adoption was the only course the two were comfortable with. It was just that finding a Pokemon who did not want their child was rare in this area, while others were independent from young and did not need the care of parents. For them, this egg was like a windfall of luck after years of disappointment. "Well, I guess that makes things slightly easier on me then," motioning with her tail to the bag at her side. Chime lifted the top fold of the bag up, revealing the egg to Luciv. "Here's the egg I mentioned in my letter. Their name is Starlight, and they are an Eevee egg." Luciv, who had been looking at the egg adoringly, lifted his gaze at that and looked meaningfully at Chime. "When you last passed through here, was your team not looking for 2 Eevee evolution outlaws? Is this egg related to them?" Chime flinched slightly at the sharp gaze from the general. Flattening her ears, she glanced away and nodded. "Yes, it is one of the 3 eggs they had just before we captured them. Byte put forward the suggestion of rehoming the 3 eggs to Pokemon who may be keen on adopting them." Luciv kept his eyes trained on Chime for a moment without responding before lowering his head to sigh. "While I do not know what happened since the last time you all came through here, it seems it's been a tiresome goal for you 3 that has finally been accomplished. This Eevee will still be my child, and I will love dearly regardless of who brought them into the world." Chime cautiously looked back at the Tinkaton as he was reaching for the egg to carry while adjusting his grip on his hammer. "This child is a blank slate regardless of their birth parents, and has endless possibilities in front of them." Cradling the egg gently to his chest, Luciv looked back up at Chime, causing her to step back warningly. "What is it?" she squeaked out. "You said there were 3. Where did the other 2 end up?" Byte took the egg named Storm to the fog-shrouded basin to the Bennett matron there. Tracker took the egg named Esper to the mossy forest to the Go-Goat and Skiddo siblings that led the herd. Luciv nodded before turning back to the egg with a tender gaze. "I will keep that in mind when they grow old enough to be curious for adventure. If the 3 siblings are meant to meet again, then the moon shall light their path." His words shocked Chime as her gaze took on a new meaning. "You know of that legend as well?" The Tinkaton nodded without moving his gaze. "It is a tale long passed down in my homeland. No one knows who was the first to tell the story, nor what it truly signifies, but any and all who grew up there for any amount of time have long engraved it into their bones." Chime's paws started to shake as she dipped her head to Luciv in a quick farewell, with no words, as she turned and fled as if fire was licking at her paws. Luciv stared at the spooked leopard and narrowed his eyes with slight pity at her fleeing form. Not long after, he turned and started walking down the path towards his home, with Starlight in his arms, murmuring to himself, "The silent yet gentle, silvery light that watches over us, high above our heads, shall light the path of those who have encountered under its watchful gaze, and connect them like stars in the sky. Constellations made a living Pokemon tell the tale of one's life, weaving a giant and bright picture that draws the eyes of others. Those who meet or part under a new moon will have their lights never form or severed for good. Not all who cross paths are meant to connect in the way of this living constellation, but if the binding of the moon bears fruit and they meet yet again, one will truly know that they are moonbound." As Chime made it to the border of the plains, she looked over her shoulder at the empty area behind her, her uneven breathing and rapid heartbeat ringing in her ears as she turned and continued to run. She ran a good distance, well past any nearby towns, and was left at the edge of a rapidly flowing river as the moon began to rise. Looking down into the water, she stared at her reflection. During her time running, many thoughts had crossed her mind, and many had been thrown to the wind, finally settling on one thought. Looking up at the rising moon that seemed large and ready to swallow her whole, she closed her eyes and made a wish. "Should I get the chance to meet the 3 of them again, I would like to make it up to them for what I had tried to do. I may not deserve to be bound to them, and for our paths to cross once more, but please, let me make things right once I have sorted things out within myself." As Chime opened her eyes once more, she saw her reflection surrounded in a silver veil. Not only her reflection, but her paws as well. Eyes going wide, she looked back up at the moon and saw a wavering, shadowy figure floating in its light. She could not make out the features, but she could feel that it was watching her. "The 3 of you wished upon the light of the moon, the 2 before you for the siblings to be able to cross paths again with each other once they were out of their shells, yet you wish to cross paths with them again yourself. I will grant your wish, but I will only bind you to the Eevee you delivered to its new home. The rest will be up to you." Once the unknown voice faded, the figure did as well, gone as quick as it had come. After hearing the mysterious Pokemon's statement, Chime's resolve from her wish was set in stone. One day she would once again meet Starlight, and when she did, she would surely make things right.